Hello there, my truly magnificent, brilliant friends, and a very warm, heartfelt welcome back to another highly special, extended episode of the English Daily Podcast. I am absolutely overjoyed and deeply honored to have you here, spending your incredibly valuable time with me today, no matter where you are listening from in this big, beautiful world. Perhaps you are sitting comfortably in a quiet room with a warm mug of hot coffee or tea. Perhaps you are doing your evening household chores, washing the dishes, folding your clean clothes, or tidying up your bedroom. Or perhaps you are walking outside in a fresh green park, listening to the birds while you take your daily healthy steps. Wherever you are, and whatever you are doing right now, I want to invite you to take a deep breath. Relax the muscles in your jaw. Let your shoulders drop completely. This is your personal sanctuary for language growth. There are no difficult tests here, there are no strict grades, and there is absolutely no judgment. There is only you, your incredible passion, and my slow, clear voice. My name is Kevin, and I am your host, your teacher, and your dedicated guide on this beautiful path towards speaking natural English with absolute freedom, genuine confidence, and real peace of mind. In today's massive episode, we are going to embark on an exceptionally long and immersive journey. We are going to learn and practice English using one of the most famous, exciting, and emotionally powerful classic romantic stories in world literature. But as I always promise you, do not worry or feel overwhelmed. We are not going to open a thick, ancient textbook filled with complicated, outdated grammar rules that make your head hurt. That would be far too heavy and frustrating for an A1 or A2 learner. Instead, I have personally crafted a beautifully summarized, highly expanded, and clear version of this famous tale. This version is written using clean sentence structures, active vocabulary, and a perfect natural rhythm that allows your brain to absorb English effortlessly. The spectacular story we are going to explore today is called Jane Eyre. It is a deeply moving adventure about a poor orphan girl who grows up in a cruel house, a strict boarding school hidden inside the cold hills, a massive, mysterious mansion filled with secrets and late-night laughter, a powerful love that faces an impossible choice, in deep lessons about patience, inner strength, moral boundaries, and how a human being can maintain their absolute self-respect and dignity when they face total darkness. Let us carefully review our master plan for this mega episode today so you know exactly what to expect. First, in Part 2, you will hear the complete, extensive story told slowly and clearly. I want you to simply sit back, close your eyes if you can, relax, and let the vivid imagery and emotions of the story paint a magnificent movie inside your imagination. Second, in Part 3, we will enter a profound conceptual deep dive. We will analyze the psychological themes of the story and discover how the thick stone walls of the old school connect directly to your personal success as an English language learner. Third, in Part 4, we will step inside the English Daily Vocabulary Studio. I will pull out 20 fantastic, practical phrases directly from the narrative. I will explain each word in a completely transparent, simple way, give you real-life, everyday examples, and then we will immediately begin our giant, interactive shadowing workout. Every time I finish a sentence, you will hear the simple cue to speak. When you hear that cue, open your mouth, find your courage, use your voice, and become my perfect vocal echo. And finally, in Part 5, we will look at an incredible practical strategy called passive lifestyle integration to supercharge your daily routine. This is going to be a comprehensive and immersive episode, so clear your mind, get comfortable, and let us begin our great journey into Jane Eyre. A long time ago, in the early 19th century, the northern part of England was a very cold, windy, and gray place. The landscape was full of wild, rolling hills called moors, and thick rain clouds constantly covered the winter sky. In a large, wealthy country house called Gateshead Hall, there lived a small orphan girl named Jane Eyre. Jane was a very unusual, quiet, and plain child. Her parents had died from a dangerous sickness when she was a tiny baby, and she had no money, no brothers, and no sisters. She was left under the care of her aunt, a wealthy, hard-hearted, and cruel woman named Mrs. Reed. Mrs. Reed had 3 spoiled children of her own, John, Eliza, and Georgiana. Mrs. Reed and her children hated Jane because she was a poor orphan. They treated her like an unwanted animal or a servant. John Reed was a violent, arrogant boy who constantly pushed Jane, hit her face, and shouted insults at her. Jane was completely isolated, and she spent her days hiding inside a small corner of the drawing room, behind a thick red curtain, reading old books about birds and dreaming of a better world. One cold afternoon, John Reed discovered Jane's hiding place. He grabbed her book, threw it violently at her head, causing her to bleed, and hit her again. For the first time in her 10 years of life, an intense surge of pride and anger awoke inside Jane's small chest. She stood up straight, looked at John with fierce eyes, and fought back bravely, shouting, "You are a cruel, wicked boy. You are like a murderer." Mrs. Reed rushed into the room, her face dark with anger. She blamed Jane completely for the disturbance. As a brutal punishment, Mrs. Reed ordered 2 heavy servants to drag Jane away and lock her inside a terrifying room called the Red Room. The Red Room was a large, luxurious bedroom where Jane's late uncle, Mr. Reed, had passed away many years before. The room was completely silent, cold and dark, decorated with heavy red curtains, dark mahogany furniture, and a giant mirror that cast ghostly reflections. Little Jane sat on a cold velvet chair, trembling in absolute terror. The wind screamed outside the windows. Suddenly, she saw a strange moving light flickering across the ceiling. She believed it was the ghost of her late uncle coming from the grave. She ran to the heavy wooden door, hitting it with her tiny fists, screaming in total agony for mercy, but her aunt refused to unlock it. Jane's breath became short, her mind collapsed from pure panic, and she fell unconscious onto the carpet. After that terrible night, Jane became severely ill with a heavy fever. A kind local apothecary doctor named Mr. Lloyd came to examine her. He saw that Jane's suffering was caused by the extreme emotional cruelty of her environment. He sat next to her bed, spoke to her with absolute gentleness, and suggested to Mrs. Reed that Jane should be sent away from Gateshead to a boarding school. Mrs. Reed agreed immediately because she wanted to get rid of the orphan forever. A few weeks later, a severe, cold-hearted, and hyper-religious gentleman named Mr. Brocklehurst arrived at the house. He was the headmaster of a charity boarding school for poor orphan girls called Lowood School. Mrs. Reed spoke to him deceitfully, claiming that Jane had a wicked character, a deceitful tongue, and a bad heart. Mr. Brocklehurst looked at Jane with severe eyes and vowed that he would train her soul with strict discipline and punishment. The journey to Lowood School was long, wet, and exhausting. When Jane arrived at the school, she discovered that the environment was a total nightmare of absolute hardship. The school building was a large, dark stone structure hidden inside a damp valley. The rooms were freezing because there was no fuel for the fires, the windows were covered in frost, and the food was completely terrible. Every morning, the young girls were woken up at 5 o'clock in the pitch black. They were given a small bowl of burnt porridge that smelled horrible, and they had to study complicated religious books for hours without talking or resting. Mr. Brocklehurst was an absolute tyrant. He believed that to save the girls' souls, he had to starve their physical bodies. He ordered the teachers to cut off all the girls' long hair to teach them humility, and he punished them severely for the smallest mistakes. But inside this cold prison, Jane found a beautiful spark of hope, a wonderful teacher named Miss Temple. Miss Temple was a lady of immense grace, kindness, and deep intelligence. She looked after the orphans with motherly love, gave them extra bread when the food was burnt, and encouraged Jane to study hard. Jane also met her very first real friend, an older girl named Helen Burns. Helen was an exceptionally gentle, patient, and wise girl who read poetry and never complained when the teachers punished her. Helen taught Jane a profound lesson. Jane, do not hold anger inside your heart. Forgiveness is much more powerful than revenge. During the spring, a catastrophic disaster hit Lowood School. Because the valley was damp and the children were weak and starving, a dangerous epidemic of typhus fever spread quickly through the crowded bedrooms. Dozens of young girls became severely ill, and the school became a silent hospital full of sorrow. Sadly, gentle Helen Burns became ill too, not from the fever, but from a severe lung consumption sickness. One night, Jane crept quietly into Helen's private bedroom, climbed into her small bed, and wrapped her arms tightly around her dying friend. Helen smiled weakly, kissed Jane's cheek, and whispered, "I am happy, Jane. I am going to my long home, and I feel no fear." The next morning, when the sun rose, Helen had passed away peacefully in Jane's embrace. Jane buried her friend in a quiet corner of the churchyard, marking the spot with a small stone tablet containing a single Latin word, resurgam, which means, "I shall rise again." After the epidemic, the public discovered the terrible conditions of Lowood School. The government removed Mr. Brocklehurst from his high position, rebuilt the schoolrooms, improved the food, and hired new, kind managers. Jane stayed at Lowood for 8 more years, 6 years as a brilliant, hard-working student, and 2 years as a successful teacher. She absorbed every lesson like a dry sponge. She learned French, drawing, history, and literature, transforming her mind into a magnificent instrument of intelligence and refined manners. But when Miss Temple eventually married and left the school, Jane felt a sudden, sharp surge of restlessness. The stone walls of Lowood felt like a cage. She wanted to see the real world. She put an advertisement in the newspaper, searching for a position as a governess, a private teacher for a wealthy family. A few days later, she received a favorable reply from a grand house called Thornfield Hall. She packed her small bag, boarded a fast carriage, and left Lowood forever. When Jane arrived at Thornfield Hall in the dark evening, her heart filled with absolute admiration. It was a massive, ancient, and luxurious country mansion, surrounded by giant trees and beautiful gardens. The interior was magnificent, with long corridors, marble fireplaces, velvet carpets, and rows of dark oil paintings on the walls. She was welcomed warmly by the house manager, a very kind, cheerful, and talkative elderly lady named Mrs. Fairfax. Mrs. Fairfax explained that Jane's pupil was a sweet 7-year-old French girl named Adele Varens. Adele was a lively child who loved to sing, dance, and speak French. Jane became very fond of her immediately and began to teach her step by step, day by day. The owner of Thornfield Hall was a very wealthy, powerful, and mysterious gentleman named Mr. Edward Rochester. Mr. Rochester was a man of absolute authority, but he spent all his time traveling across Europe, leaving the mansion empty for months because he hated the house. For the first few weeks, life at Thornfield was very quiet and peaceful, but Jane noticed a strange atmosphere inside the mansion.
During the stormy nights, when she was sitting alone in her room, she often heard a terrifying sound coming from the third floor of the house, a hidden wing where the servants were forbidden to go. It was a loud, hollow, and demonic laugh that echoed down the long corridors. Ha ha ha! It sounded like a mad creature or a monster in the dark walls. When Jane asked Mrs. Fairfax about the horrible laughter, the kind manager looked unusually nervous, adjusted her spectacles doubtfully, and said, "Oh, do not worry, Jane. That is just Grace Poole. She is a rough, eccentric servant woman who works upstairs, sewing carpets and drinking too much beer. Ignore her." But Jane felt certain that there was a dark secret hidden behind those closed doors. One cold, foggy evening, Jane walked down a narrow country path outside the mansion to deliver a letter to the village post office. The ground was covered in smooth ice, and the air was completely silent. Suddenly, she heard a loud thumping noise on the road. A tall man riding a massive black horse burst through the thick fog. As the horse passed Jane, it slipped violently on a slab of ice and collapsed under the stones. The rider's foot was trapped underneath the heavy animal, and he let out a sharp groan of pain and agony. Jane didn't run away. She walked bravely to the fallen rider and offered her help. The man was not handsome. He was about 35 years old, with a large, dark chest, a severe, frowning face, heavy black eyebrows, and eyes full of fierce, intense energy. He looked rough and angry. He looked at Jane's simple gray coat and asked with a rough, whispered voice, "Who are you? Where do you come from?" "I am the governess at Thornfield Hall, monsieur," Jane answered calmly.
The man groaned, leaned heavily on Jane's small, strong shoulder, climbed back onto his horse, and rode away into the fog without saying thank you. When Jane returned to Thornfield Hall, she found the mansion in a massive bustle of excitement. The master of the house had returned. It was Mr. Edward Rochester. Jane realized with a shock that the angry rider on the ice road was none other than her employer. Mr. Rochester began to invite Jane to his private library room in the evenings after dinner. They sat by the warm fireplace, drinking tea, and began to talk for hours. Rochester was a highly educated man of the world, but his soul was full of a bitter weight of old sorrow and cynicism. He had made a terrible mistake in his past life, and his heart was a dark prison. But when he talked to Jane, he found something extraordinary. Jane did not look down. She did not look afraid of his severe temper, and she did not use the shallow, false manners of high society. She spoke with an absolute honesty, a fierce independence, and a deep, crystalline intelligence. Rochester looked into her eyes and felt a sudden, magnificent transformation happening inside his soul. He said to her, "Jane, you are a strange, magical creature. You look like a quiet little bird, but you have a fierce spirit inside your chest that can break through any cage. Your conversation gives me a fresh, clean oxygen that heals my life." Jane also found herself falling deeply, hopelessly in love with this rough, mysterious man. He was the first person in the world who truly recognized her mind and respected her soul. One night, Jane was woken up by a strange smell of smoke filling her bedroom. She opened her door and heard the horrible, demonic laugh echoing right outside her threshold. She ran down the corridor and saw that the door to Mr. Rochester's private bedroom was open. Giant orange flames were leaping out of his bed. The velvet curtains were burning like a hot furnace, and the room was full of thick black smoke. Mr. Rochester was lying on the bed, trapped in a deep, heavy sleep, suffocating from the smoke. Jane didn't hesitate for a single second. She ran into the burning room, picked up a massive basin of cold water, and threw it over the bed, extinguishing the fire completely. She grabbed Rochester's shoulders and shook him violently until he woke up. Rochester blinked in confusion, looked at the wet bed and the smoking curtains, and realized that Jane had just saved his life from a brutal death. He held her white hands tightly in the dark room, his eyes shining with an intense wave of real affection and gratitude. He whispered, "Jane, my cherished preserver, you have saved my life tonight. I owe you a debt that I can never repay with money." He ordered her to keep the fire an absolute secret from the other servants, blaming it on an accidental candle. The next morning, Jane expected Rochester to speak to her of love, but instead, he suddenly left the mansion again and traveled to a nearby estate. A few days later, he returned to Thornfield bringing a large group of wealthy, elegant noblemen and ladies from high society for a massive, extravagant party.
The guests included a young woman named Blanche Ingram. Blanche Ingram was exceptionally beautiful, tall, with long, black, curly hair and an aristocratic smile. She wore exquisite silk dresses and played the piano beautifully, but she was also an incredibly arrogant, selfish, and hollow person who looked down on the poor and treated Jane like a worthless rag or a piece of furniture. The newspapers whispered that Mr. Rochester was going to marry Blanche Ingram very soon to expand his fortune and social status. Jane sat in the dark corner of the drawing room during the party nights, watching Rochester talk to Blanche, her heart breaking into 1,000 pieces with a silent weight of intense sorrow and jealousy. She felt like a poor, plain outsider again. During the party, a mysterious gentleman from the distant country of Jamaica arrived at the mansion. His name was Mr. Richard Mason. As soon as Mr. Rochester saw Mason's face, his countenance turned completely pale with an absolute terror and panic, as if he had seen a ghost from his past. That night, a terrifying scream echoed through the entire mansion at midnight. It was a loud, bleating cry of pure agony that woke up all the guests. The noble ladies ran out into the corridors, screaming in a total panic. Mr. Rochester ran down the stairs, checked the rooms, and calmly lied to the guests, saying, "Do not worry, it is just a servant having an accidental nightmare. Return to your beds." But as soon as the house became quiet again, Rochester came to Jane's room. He took her hand, led her up to the secret third-floor wing, unlocked a heavy wooden door, and pushed her inside. The room was dark, and on a velvet sofa sat Mr. Richard Mason, covered in blood. His shoulder bone was severely cut, and his flesh had been brutally bitten by human teeth. Rochester washed the wound, turned to Jane, and said, "Jane, I must run to find a doctor immediately. I must leave you alone in this dark room with this bleeding man for 2 hours. You must hold this wet sponge to his chest. You must keep the room silent, and you must never let him speak to you about his injury. Can I trust your courage?" Jane looked at the dark walls, heard a strange, scratching, animal-like hissing sound coming from behind a heavy cupboard door in the corner, but she looked at Rochester and said firmly, "Yes, you can trust me." She sat inside that chamber of horrors for 2 long hours, holding the bloody sponge, her heart thumping with intense dread, until Rochester returned with a carriage and sent Mason away from England in secret before the sun rose. A few days later, Jane received a letter from Gateshead Hall. Her cruel aunt, Mrs. Reed, was dying on her deathbed after her spoiled son John had ruined the family fortune and ended his own life. Jane decided to keep her promise of forgiveness. She traveled back to Gateshead, walked into her aunt's room, and sat next to her. Mrs. Reed looked at Jane with old, stubborn eyes and handed her a private letter that had arrived 3 years before. The letter was from a wealthy uncle named Jane Eyre who lived in the tropical island of Madeira. The letter said, "Dear Madam, I am looking for my niece, Jane Eyre. I have no children, I am very wealthy, and I want to adopt her, leave her my entire inheritance fortune, and bring her to live with me." Mrs. Reed had hidden the letter because she hated Jane and wanted her to remain poor. Jane felt no anger. She kissed her aunt's forehead, forgave her completely for all her past cruelty, and stayed with her until she passed away. When Jane returned to Thornfield Hall, the grand party had finished, and the mansion was quiet again. One beautiful, warm, midsummer night, Jane was walking through the orchard garden under the bright stars. The air smelled like blooming roses and fresh grass. Suddenly, she met Mr. Rochester. They walked along the path together, and Rochester looked at her with a serious, emotional face. He said, "Jane, my carriage is ready. My wedding to Miss Blanche Ingram is arranged, and you must leave Thornfield forever. I have found a new governess position for you in the distant country of Ireland." When Jane heard the word Ireland, her heart broke completely, and she could not control her tears anymore. She looked at him, her body trembling, and shouted with a proud, passionate voice, full of independent fire, "Ireland is too far away, monsieur. It separates me from Thornfield, and it separates me from you. Do you think I can stay here and watch you marry a woman who has no soul? Do you think because I am poor, plain, and small that I have no heart? You are mistaken. Our souls are equal before God. If God had given me beauty and wealth, I would have made it as difficult for you to leave me as it is for me to leave you. I am not a machine without feelings, and I am not a quiet bird trapped inside a cage. I am a free human being with an independent will, and I am leaving you now." Rochester smiled a magnificent, radiant smile of pure joy. He grabbed her arms, pulled her close to his chest, wrapped his powerful arms around her, and cried out with deep emotion, "Jane, my beautiful, fierce little bird, you were right. I am not going to marry Blanche Ingram. She only loves my money, and she has a heart of cold stone. I only told you that lie because I wanted to test your heart. You are my equal, you are my match, and you are my true life. Jane, will you marry me? Will you become my wife?" Jane looked into his eyes under the moonlight, saw the absolute truth and love shining inside his features, and whispered, "Yes, I will." At that exact second, a violent storm erupted in the sky. A massive flash of lightning split the dark clouds, and a deafening thumping noise of thunder shook the ground. The lightning hit a giant, ancient oak tree in the center of the garden, splitting the massive trunk completely into two pieces. It was a terrifying omen from nature. The next month was a blur of happy preparations. Rochester bought Jane beautiful white silk dresses and expensive jewels, but Jane refused to accept them all. She wanted to remain herself. She wrote a letter to her wealthy uncle Jane Eyre in Madeira to tell him about her marriage, hoping to find her own independence. The morning of the wedding arrived. It was a quiet, gray morning. Jane wore her simple white wedding tunic, and her face was pale but peaceful. They walked into the local church, standing before the altar. The priest opened his book, looked at the couple, and said to the small crowd, "If anyone knows a legal reason why these two persons cannot be married honorably, speak now or forever hold your peace." The room was completely silent. The priest was about to continue. Suddenly, a loud voice shouted from the back door, "The marriage cannot continue. I forbid it. There is a permanent legal barrier." A tall, serious lawyer named Mr. Briggs walked into the church, accompanied by a man in a dark cloak. It was Richard Mason. Mr. Briggs held up a piece of paper and read it with a firm voice. "I declare that Edward Rochester is already legally married.
15 years ago, in the country of Jamaica, he married my sister, a wealthy woman named Bertha Mason. The marriage is still legal, and his wife is alive today."
Jane felt a cold wave of absolute horror hit her chest. Her mind spun in a total vortex of confusion. She looked at Rochester. Rochester's face turned completely red with a violent, demonic rage. He did not deny the truth. He drew his arms around Jane, looked at the lawyer, and shouted with a fierce, ruined voice, "Yes, the lawyer speaks the truth. I am already married, but look at the wife they gave me. Come with me, gentlemen. Come to my house and see the nightmare I have lived with for 15 years. He dragged Jane, the lawyer, the priest, and Mason straight back to Thornfield Hall, up to the secret third-floor wing, and unlocked the heavy wooden door of the hidden room. Inside the dark chamber, behind a large screen, a terrifying figure was crawling on all fours like a wild beast. It was a woman, but she looked like a monster. She had long, coarse gray hair, her face was purple and bloated, and her eyes were wide with a complete animal-like madness. She let out a horrible hissing roar when she saw the crowd. It was Bertha Mason, the madwoman in the attic. Bertha had been born into a family of hidden madness, and her wealthy family had lied to Rochester to get his money. Soon after the wedding, she became completely insane, violent, and demonic. Rochester could not divorce her because of British law, so he brought her back to his mansion, hired Grace Poole to watch her securely in the dark wing, and traveled across Europe to escape his shame. Bertha was the creature who had started the bedroom fire and bitten her own brother Richard Mason in the dark night. Bertha jumped at Rochester, trying to choke his neck with her sharp claws, but Rochester used his massive physical strength to tie her tightly to a wooden chair. He turned to Jane, his eyes full of tears, and whispered, "Look at her, Jane, and look at you. She is a mad monster who hates me, and you are my gentle angel. I only wanted to find a drop of happiness in my ruined life. Forgive me."
Jane walked out of the room in absolute silence. She locked herself inside her bedroom. Her entire world had collapsed into white ash. Her beautiful wedding dress was a mockery. She fell to her knees on the carpet, weeping bitter tears of pure despair, her heart thumping with intense agony. That evening, Mr. Rochester sat outside her door, begging her to open it. When she finally stepped out, he fell to his knees, wrapped his arms around her waist, and wept loudly, crying, "Jane, do not leave me. I cannot live without you. Come with me to the south of France. We can live inside a beautiful white villa near the sea. No one will know our story. We will live as husband and wife in the sight of love, even if the law says no. Do not destroy my life." Jane faced the ultimate, most painful moral crisis of her existence. She loved him with every fiber of her soul. She knew that if she left him, he would sink back into madness and total despair. If she stayed, she would have luxury, comfort, and the man she adored.
But Jane looked into her own heart and remembered her absolute self-respect. She knew that if she became his mistress without a legal marriage, she would be breaking her own moral boundaries. Her dignity would be ruined, and she would lose her self-control. She would be sacrificing her identity for a shallow pleasure. She looked at his crying face, held his head gently, kissed his forehead with pure, divine compassion, and said with a firm, broken voice, "No, Edward, I must leave you. I care for myself. The more lonely I am, the more friendless I am, the more I must respect myself. I will keep the laws of God and the rules of honor. We must part." In the middle of the dark, silent night, while the whole mansion was sleeping, Jane opened her door quietly. She did not take his money. She did not take her jewels, and she did not take her white silk dresses. She took only a small bag with her gray coat and a few coins. She crept down the stairs, opened the grand front door, and walked away into the cold, foggy night, leaving the man she loved behind to save her soul.
Jane walked for miles down the lonely roads, crying in the dark forest, until she spent her last coins on a passing coach. The coach left her at a desolate crossroads deep in the northern moors, a place called Whitcross. Jane was completely bankrupt, homeless, and entirely alone. For 2 days and 2 nights, she wandered through the wild, windy moors under the freezing rain. She had no food, no water, and no shelter. She had to eat wild berries from the bushes and sleep on the wet heather grass under the cold sky. She became so weak, her body so fragile, that she could no longer stand. She collapsed in the mud outside a small stone cottage, ready to pass away peacefully in the rain. The cottage door opened. A young, serious gentleman carrying a lantern noticed her body. He picked her up in his strong arms, carried her inside the warm house, and laid her near the fireplace. His name was St. John Rivers, and he lived there with his 2 kind, educated sisters, Diana and Mary.
The Rivers family became Jane's saviors. They dried her wet clothes, gave her warm milk and bread, and let her rest for weeks until her pink health returned. Jane did not tell them her real name because she was afraid Rochester would find her. She called herself Jane Elliott. St. John Rivers was a very unusual man. He was a young clergyman, a holy priest, and a missionary. He was exceptionally handsome, tall with blue eyes and a face like a Greek statue. But he was also a cold-hearted, proud, and completely rigid man. He had zero emotion or warmth inside his chest. He viewed life as a strict military battle for religious duty. St. John noticed Jane's deep intelligence and refined manners. He gave her a simple job as the schoolmistress of a new charity school for poor village girls in the parish. Jane accepted happily, worked hard every day, and became deeply beloved by the country children. She lived a simple, independent life in a tiny wooden cottage, keeping her mind calm and her routine steady. One snowy winter evening, St. John came to Jane's cottage to deliver a message. He looked at a drawing Jane had made on a piece of paper. In the corner of the paper, Jane had accidentally written her real name, Jane Eyre. St. John gasped in complete surprise, pulled a newspaper article out of his pocket, and looked at her with wide eyes. He said, "Jane, your real identity is unmasked. For the past few months, a lawyer in London named Mr. Briggs has been searching for you across the entire kingdom. Your wealthy uncle, John Eyre, has passed away in Madeira. He has left his entire massive fortune to you. Jane, you are now an independent lady, and you possess 20,000 pounds of gold." Jane was shocked, but then she discovered an even beautiful truth. St. John explained that his own mother was the sister of John Eyre. That meant St. John, Diana, and Mary were Jane's own cousins. Jane did not care about the 20,000 pounds for herself. Her heart filled with a massive, magnificent surge of pure joy because she had finally found what she wanted her whole life, a real, loving family. She immediately decided to divide the fortune equally into 4 separate parts. She gave 5,000 pounds to St. John Rivers, 5,000 to Diana, and 5,000 to Mary, keeping only 5,000 for herself. She said, "Now we are all equal, and we are true brothers and sisters." A few weeks later, St. John Rivers came to Jane's house with a cold, severe face. He was preparing to travel to the hot, dangerous country of India to spend his life working as a missionary priest, helping the poor and dying under the sun. He looked at Jane and gave her a strict, cold ultimatum. "Jane, you must come to India with me. You have a strong mind, an independent spirit, and you are perfect for this holy work. But you cannot come as my sister. You must marry me. You must become my wife and dedicate your whole soul to my duty."
Jane felt a cold shiver of fear touch her spine. She looked at his handsome stone-like face and realized the dangerous truth. St. John did not love her. He did not care about her heart or her feelings. He only wanted to use her intelligence as a functional tool for his religious mission. He wanted to lock her soul inside a cage of cold duty, which would kill her spirit within a year. Jane stood straight, looked into his blue eyes, and said firmly, "St. John, I am ready to go to India with you as your sister and your fellow worker. I will sacrifice my comfort for the poor, but I will never marry you. I will not give my heart to a man who has no love for me. That would be a crime against my own humanity and my absolute self-respect." St. John became furious, his face dark with proud anger. For days he used a cold psychological manipulation to pressure her, claiming that if she refused his proposal, she was breaking the laws of God and would be condemned to hell. Jane's mind became weak, confused, and exhausted by his heavy words. She sat in the room one quiet evening, almost ready to surrender her will and say yes just to stop the pain. But right at that final second, in the middle of the deep silence of the midnight room, a miracle happened. The air in the room became suddenly warm. Jane felt a strange electric vibration pass through her physical body, and suddenly she heard a voice. It was a masculine voice, incredibly deep, beautiful, and beautifully musical. It was the voice of Edward Rochester. The voice seemed to come from hundreds of miles away across the dark moors, crying out into the night sky with a broken wave of deep agony and love. "Jane, Jane, Jane." Jane did not hesitate for a single second. Her mind became completely clear, and her confidence burst through the chains of St. John's manipulation like an explosion of light. She stood up, opened the door, and shouted into the dark forest, "I am coming, Edward. I am coming. Wait for me." The next morning, before the sun rose, Jane packed her bag, boarded a fast carriage, and traveled back to Yorkshire as fast as possible. Her heart was thumping with an intense, unstoppable hope. When the carriage finally stopped near the edge of the Thornfield estate, Jane ran through the trees to look at the mansion. But when she stepped out into the clearing, she stopped in absolute pure horror and shock. Thornfield Hall was gone. The magnificent country mansion was a ruined, black skeleton of stone. The windows were empty holes, the marble staircases were covered in black ash, and the giant roofs had completely collapsed onto the ground. The house was a dead, silent grave. Jane ran to a local inn in the village to find the townspeople and ask for the truth. The innkeeper looked at her with a sad face and explained the tragic history. "2 months after you left, mistress," the innkeeper said softly, "in the middle of a dark winter night, the madwoman Bertha Mason escaped from her room again. She used a candle to start a massive, catastrophic fire in the attic. The flames spread quickly through the whole house like a bright, hot furnace. Mr. Rochester woke up and rescued all the servants from their beds and carried them out to safety. Then he ran back into the roaring flames to save his mad wife. He climbed up onto the very top roof balcony of the burning tower, calling her name.
But Bertha stood on the edge of the roof, screaming a horrible mad laugh, and before he could touch her hand, she jumped off the balcony, crashing violently onto the stone pavement below, dying instantly.
Right at that second, the giant wooden timbers of the roof collapsed with a violent crash, trapping Mr. Rochester inside the burning furnace. He managed to break through a wall and escape, but he was severely injured. A heavy stone fell on his face, destroying one of his eyes, and a falling beam crushed his right hand completely. He is alive today, mistress, but he is almost completely blind. He has only one hand, and he lives like a broken, lonely hermit inside a small wooden house deep in the dark forest, a place called Ferndean. Jane did not wait another second. She caught a carriage and drove straight into the thick, dark forest of Ferndean. She walked up the grass path to the small, quiet wooden house. The air was silent and damp under the trees. She opened the front door quietly and walked into the simple living room.
Sitting in a leather armchair near a small dying fire sat Mr. Edward Rochester. He looked completely transformed. His powerful body was thin and bent. His hair was long and wild. His right sleeve coat was empty where his hand used to be, and a heavy cloth bandage covered his eyes. He looked like a giant, ancient tree that had been split by a lightning bolt. He sat there in total darkness, a picture of absolute loneliness and despair. Poole's sister, who worked as the servant at Ferndean, handed Jane a glass of fresh water. Jane took the glass, walked softly across the carpet, and stood right in front of his chair. Rochester smelled the air, his body trembling suddenly, and he reached out his remaining left hand into the empty space. His fingers touched Jane's small, strong hand. He caught her wrist tightly, his breath catching completely in his throat, and he whispered with a broken, terrified voice, Who is this? What hand is this? Is it an illusion? Is it a ghost?"
Jane fell to her knees on the carpet, wrapped her beautiful arms around his pale face, and kissed his pale face, and said with a proud, strong voice full of genuine love, warmth, and compassion, "No, Edward, it is no illusion, and it is no ghost. I am Jane Eyre. I have returned to you. I am an independent lady now. I have my own fortune, and I am here to become your nurse, your companion, and your true wife. I will never leave your side again." Rochester wept bitter tears of pure, unstoppable happiness, falling into her embrace, holding her as if he would never let her go. He looked up toward the sky through his blind eyes and whispered, "Thank you, God. Thank you for showing mercy to a broken sinner. My angel has returned home to me."
Jane and Edward Rochester were married in a very quiet, simple village church a few days later. There were no wealthy, arrogant guests from high society, no false display of luxury, and no Blanche Ingram. There was only true love, absolute equality, and a magnificent bond of deep brotherhood and devotion. They lived a long, wonderfully happy life together inside their quiet forest sanctuary. And a few years later, another miracle arrived. A famous eye physician from London examined Rochester's face, performed a clever operation, and slowly a small spark of sight returned to his remaining eye. One beautiful morning, Rochester held Jane's hand, looked down at his own chest, and saw that Jane was holding a tiny, beautiful baby boy with golden hair. He could see the face of his own child. He looked into Jane's eyes, and his heart filled with an absolute, immortal peace. The dark winter of their past had vanished completely into the blue sky, and their true transformation was complete. Jane Eyre had started her life as a poor, rejected orphan behind a red curtain, but because she maintained her self-respect and her moral boundaries with absolute courage, she stood before the world as a proud, successful, and magnificent woman,
living a life of true freedom, love, and humanity forever.
Welcome back, my truly wonderful, dedicated friends. Kevin here again. Now that you have listened to the complete, beautiful saga of Jane Eyre, let us step back together and enter our profound conceptual analysis. Let us understand the deep psychology of this romantic and dramatic masterpiece and discover how the journey of Jane connects directly to your personal success as an English language learner. When you look closely at the beginning of this narrative, little Jane Eyre is locked inside the terrifying Red Room at Gateshead Hall. She is surrounded by dark mahogany furniture, ghostly reflections in the giant mirror, total silence, and a freezing winter wind. She feels completely trapped, helpless, and overwhelmed by the cruelty of her environment. When she sees a moving light on the ceiling, her mind collapses from pure panic. She screams for mercy, and she faints from intense emotional anxiety.
I want to tell you a very profound truth. Many English language learners lock themselves inside an internal red room of language anxiety and shyness every single day. When you think about stepping out into a real conversation with a human being, or when you join an English learning class, you might feel a sudden, sharp surge of intense panic inside your chest. You look at your language skills and you think to yourself, my grammar is plain and poor like Jane's clothes. My pronunciation is full of clumsy mistakes. If I open my mouth to speak in public, people will look down on me like Mrs. Reed. They will laugh at my foreign accent, and they will call me an outsider.
Because of this intense fear of being judged, your mind enters a total vortex of confusion during a conversation. You feel a cold shiver of fear run down your spine. You look at your mistakes in the mirror of your self-doubt. Your confidence faints completely, and you run back to your room, closing your mouth tightly. You lock your potential inside a dark, silent cell of shyness, refusing to use your voice ever again. You let anxiety turn your language journey into a terrifying prison. But let us look at the beautiful mechanics of Jane's transformation in the story. How does she break through her limitations to become a magnificent, independent woman? It starts with patience, education, and absolute self-respect.
When Jane is sent away to Lowood School, she doesn't find a magic utopia immediately. She finds burnt porridge, a freezing building, and a cruel tyrant named Mr. Brocklehurst. It looks like a permanent failure. But Jane does not lay down in the dirt and quit. She listens to her kind teacher, Miss Temple. She studies her lessons step by step, day by day, and she absorbs knowledge like a dry sponge for 8 long years. She turns a charity school into a magnificent university of refined manners and intelligence. To master English fluency, my friends, you must follow the exact same systematic approach that Jane followed at Lowood. Stop expecting to become a flawless, rapid speaker in 30 days without any active work. That is an impossible gamble that only leads to mental fatigue. True fluency is the natural result of long-term, daily consistency. When you open your ears to the English Daily podcast, when you stand before the mirror to perform your active shadowing workout, you are doing the exact same work that Jane did inside her study room. You are digging a tunnel through the ice wall of your limitations. Every single clear phrase you repeat is a loose stone you are removing from the wall of your shyness. And consider the most important climax of her journey, the moment she refuses to become Rochester's mistress.
She loved him with every fiber of her soul, and she had no money and no other friends in the world. But she looked at his proposal, and she realized it would break her own moral boundaries and ruin her dignity. She had the extraordinary courage to walk away into the dark night completely empty-handed because her absolute self-respect was worth more than a shallow, false position of comfort. To become a confident English speaker, you must show this exact same dignity and self-respect to your own voice. You must stop being a cruel judge to your own mind, like Mr. Brocklehurst, or the critical voice inside your head that screams, "Your sentence was wrong. You made a silly mistake with that past tense verb. You look stupid." Every time you let that critical voice throw you into despair, you are whipping your own confidence and locking your fluency in a dark closet of torture.
I want you to become like Miss Temple or Esmeralda to your own voice. Look at your language imperfections with kindness, patience, and compassion. Say to yourself, it is completely okay that my English is not perfect today. I am an A1-A2 traveler, and my mistakes are just the natural dust of the road. I care for myself, and the more difficult the language looks, the more I must show respect, patience, and love to my own effort. When you unmask your confidence with that noble spirit of self-worth, a true miracle will happen inside your soul. Your fear of public judgment will vanish completely like smoke into the blue sky. You will realize that you do not need a flawless, perfect native accent to be a magnificent human communicator. True communication is not about perfect outer porcelain. It is about the inner gold of connection, honesty, and emotional expression. Take off your hard mask of silence today, my friends. Step out onto the grand stage of life. Open your mouth and let your unique voice ring out like a beautiful bell across the world horizon.
Now, let us enter the most practical, high-energy segment of today's mega episode, the English Daily Vocabulary Studio. We are going to extract 20 exceptional vocabulary words and phrases directly from our dramatic masterpiece. These expressions are highly valuable, extremely common, and incredibly practical in natural, daily English interactions. Here are your strict instructions for our massive workout. I will read each word clearly, explain its exact meaning in a simple way, provide multiple context examples, and then we will immediately start our interactive shadowing. When you hear the word cue, open your mouth and repeat the phrase out loud with power, copying my rhythm, my emotion, and my speed exactly. Let us begin our ultimate training session.
Word 1. Orphan. An orphan is a child whose parents have both unfortunately passed away, leaving them without a family or a home to care for them. For example, the kind couple decided to adopt a small orphan boy from the local city asylum. Let us practice shadowing. Repeat after me. Jane Eyre was a poor girl. A poor, lonely orphan girl. The charity organization helps thousands of orphans. Helps them every winter. Word 2. Plain. Plain means simple, ordinary, completely natural, and without any decoration, bright colors, luxury, or outstanding physical beauty. For example, she wore a plain white cotton shirt with a pair of blue jeans to the office. Let us practice shadowing. Repeat after me. She was a plain child. A very unusual, quiet child. And a plain child. I prefer a plain cup. A plain cup of hot water instead of sweet tea.
Word 3. Mahogany. Mahogany is a type of very hard, expensive, and dark reddish-brown wood that comes from a tropical tree, widely used for making high-quality luxury furniture. For example, the lawyer's private office desk was made of a massive piece of polished mahogany. Let us practice shadowing. Repeat after me. The room was decorated. Decorated with heavy furniture. Heavy, dark mahogany furniture. He bought a wardrobe. An antique mahogany wardrobe. A wardrobe for his bedroom. Word 4. Headmaster. Headmaster is a formal word for the principal, chief manager, or male director who is completely in charge of a school, especially a boarding school. For example, the strict headmaster stood at the school gate to check the students' uniforms every morning. Let us practice shadowing. Repeat after me. Mr. Brockhorst was severe. The severe headmaster. Headmaster of the boarding school. The headmaster delivered a speech. An important speech. During the graduation ceremony. Word 5. Porridge. Porridge is a thick, hot breakfast food made by boiling oats, grain, or cereal in water or fresh milk until it becomes soft and thick. For example, I love eating a warm bowl of oat porridge with fresh honey and fruit in the morning. Let us practice shadowing. Repeat after me. They gave the young orphans. Gave them a bowl. A bowl of burnt porridge. The little girl blew. Blew on her hot porridge. To cool it down. Word 6. Consumption. In 19th century history, consumption was a formal medical word used to describe a severe, fatal lung disease called tuberculosis, which caused intense coughing and weakness. For example, many historical characters in old novels unfortunately caught consumption and passed away young. Let us practice shadowing. Helen Burns became ill. Ill from a severe consumption. A severe lung consumption. The physician tried his best. His absolute best to cure it. To cure the patient's consumption. Word 7. Governess. A governess was a historical word for a private female teacher who lived inside a wealthy family's mansion to educate, train, and look after their young children. For example, the rich noblewoman hired an educated young governess from London to teach her daughters French. Let us practice shadowing. Repeat after me. She put an advertisement. To search for a position. A governess position. The kind governess sat. Sat in the library reading. Reading a story to Adele. Word 8. Mansion. A mansion is an exceptionally large, impressive, expensive, and usually ancient country house where wealthy or noble families live in luxury. For example, the famous technology billionaire bought a magnificent mansion with 20 bedrooms near the ocean. Let us practice shadowing. Repeat after me. Thornfield Hall was massive. A massive, ancient country house. A massive, ancient country mansion. The old mansion had corridors. Long, dark corridors. And velvet carpets.
Word 9. Spectacles. Spectacles is an old-fashioned formal word for a pair of glasses or eyewear used by a person to help them read or see more clearly. For example, the old grandfather looked over the top of his silver spectacles to check the newspaper. Let us practice shadowing. Repeat after me. The house manager adjusted her spectacles. Her reading spectacles doubtfully. He lost his spectacles. Lost them inside the corridor. The narrow corridor of the office. Word 10. Cynicism. Cynicism is a psychological attitude or a belief that human beings are completely selfish, insincere, and only act for their own personal gain, leading to a bitter weight of doubt and distrust. For example, his bad experiences in politics filled his mind with a heavy wave of deep cynicism. Let us practice shadowing. Repeat after me. His soul was full of a bitter weight, a weight of old cynicism. Do not let failures turn you. Turn your positive mindset into a cold cynicism.
Word 11. Cherish. To cherish means to love, protect, value, and care for a person, an object, or a memory with intense affection, gratitude, and deep tenderness. For example, I will always cherish the wonderful time I spent practicing my English with you. Let us practice shadowing. Repeat after me. Mr. Rochester looked at her and said, "You are my preserver. You are my cherished preserver. We must cherish our health and our true family bonds above everything." Word 12. Preserve. A preserver, or a preserve, is a person who saves another life from a dangerous, harmful, or fatal situation, or a method used to protect food or nature from decay. For example, the brave Coast Guard was the true preserver of the drowning sailors during the sea storm. Let us practice shadowing. Repeat after me. Jane Eyre was his preserver. His true preserver that night. His true cherished preserver. This national park is secure. A secure sanctuary to preserve foxes. To preserve wild mountain foxes. Word 13. Attic. An attic is a small, quiet, and often dark room or space right underneath the pitched wooden roof of a house, usually used for storing old boxes or hidden furniture. For example, we went up to the dusty attic to search for my grandfather's historical letters. Let us practice shadowing. Repeat after me. Bertha Mason was the woman. The mad woman locked inside.
locked inside the attic. The rain made a noise. A loud thumping noise. On the roof above the attic. Word 14. Omen. An omen is a sign, a physical event, or a natural phenomenon that is believed to foretell or predict a future situation, which can be a good omen or a bad omen. For example, seeing a black crow in the morning was considered a bad omen by the old villagers. Let us practice shadowing. Repeat after me. The split oak tree was a sign. A terrifying bad omen. A bad omen from nature. A bright sunny morning is a sign. A beautiful good omen. Good omen for our wedding day.
Word 15. Gallows. A gallows is a heavy wooden frame or elevated platform with a hanging rope attached, used in past centuries for executing criminals or prisoners by hanging them by the neck. For example, the silent crowd gathered around the gallows in the city square to watch the execution. Let us practice shadowing. Repeat after me. If the guards caught him, they would hang him. Hang him on the gallows. The judge sentenced the traitor. Sentenced the dangerous traitor to death on the gallows. Word 15. Mistress. In historical romance novels, a mistress was a woman who had a long-term romantic relationship with a married man who supported her financially without a legal marriage. For example, she refused to become his mistress because she valued her self-respect. Let us practice shadowing. Repeat after me. She refused to become his mistress. Become it without a legal marriage. Because she valued self-respect. Living as a secret mistress would ruin her status, her social status in high society. Word number 17. Crossroads. A crossroads is a physical place or an intersection where two or more roads or paths meet and cross each other, or a crucial moment in life when you must make a major choice. For example, the traveler stopped at a lonely crossroads in the mountains, checking his paper map. Let us practice shadowing. Repeat after me. The coach left her. Left her at a crossroads. A desolate crossroads in the moors. I am standing at a crossroads. A major crossroads today. In my professional career. Word 18. Missionary. A missionary is a religious person, a priest, or a volunteer who travels to a distant, foreign, or poor country to perform charitable works, build hospitals, and teach their faith to others. For example, the young doctor spent 3 years working as a medical missionary inside an African village. Let us practice shadowing. Repeat after me. St. John Rivers wanted to spend his life as a missionary in India. The missionary group built a school, a free charity school.
built it for the local children.
Word 19. Oafish. Oafish means behaving in a very stupid, clumsy, rude, or insensitive way without showing any intelligence, grace, or care for other people's feelings. For example, his oafish behavior at the dinner table embarrassed his whole family. Let us practice shadowing. Repeat after me. The young soldier was a coward. An oafish and selfish coward. He was actually a coward. Stop making those remarks. Those oafish remarks. During our serious conversation. Word 20. Transition. A transition is a process, a movement, or a period of changing smoothly from one position, style, state, language, or condition to another over a long period of time. For example, the transition from a small country village to a giant noisy city can feel a bit shocking. Let us practice shadowing. Repeat after me. Your voice is making a transition. A beautiful transition. From basic phrases to fluency. We are studying the transition. The historical transition. Transition of the British Kingdom.
My truly legendary, phenomenal friends and language travelers, we have successfully reached the final destination of our massive storytelling journey today. What an extraordinary, expansive workout you have completed. We have followed the brave Jane Eyre from the dark red room of Gateshead Hall to the freezing corridors of Lowood School. We have stood before the burning bed curtains of Thornfield Hall. We have faced a devastating moral crisis under the split oak tree. And we have discovered that the ultimate power in human life does not lie in the shallow luxury of gold or high society status, but in the immortal diamond of self-respect, moral dignity, and pure, unconditional love that lives inside our shared souls. Before I say goodbye for today, I want to deliver a highly practical lifestyle strategy that fits perfectly with our historical drama theme. I call it passive lifestyle integration.
Think about how Jane Eyre operated her life inside her tiny village school cottage. She didn't sit around crying about her lost love or wait for her uncle's fortune to drop from heaven. She integrated her English lessons into her normal daily actions, taught the village children patiently, and placed her drawing papers on her desk table where she could interact with her art every afternoon. She made her environment a safe sanctuary for growth through daily, consistent actions. You must do the exact same thing with your English journey. Stop trying to fight a painful, exhausting battle against a heavy textbook once a week until your brain collapses from mental fatigue. Instead, build an automated language machine inside your daily life. Integrate English into your passive, automatic moments. For example, when you change your smartphone's system language to English, you are turning a digital screen you look at 100 times a day into your own personal Lowood University. Every time you read a notification ink message or open your phone's settings cabinet cupboard, your brain is doing secret, passive learning behind the scenes, just like Jane's hidden development inside the quiet schoolroom. When you are washing your morning dishes or walking down the path, let the slow, clear sounds of the English Daily Podcast be your background music. Let the melody and vocabulary enter your ears passively, like the sun rising through a beautiful stained glass window. When you scatter these small, intelligent micro-actions throughout your normal week,
Just like your morning hot coffee or a casual walk, you are changing the entire ecosystem of your mind. You are removing the heavy thumping noise of self-doubt and letting your natural confidence stand up straight on its own 2 feet. Fluency is not an impossible, distant gamble. It is the natural, beautiful result of daily, consistent habits. Thank you so much for spending your deeply valuable, precious time with me today, right here on the English Daily Podcast. I am incredibly humbled and so proud to be your companion, your coach, and your supportive peer on this path. By completing this massive, long-form lesson today, you have demonstrated that you have the focus, the determination, and the deep passion necessary to master this language. I am genuinely proud of your hard work. If this traumatic romance story brought a smile to your face, reignited your courage, or helped your listening ears, please take one quick action. Share this episode with a friend, a family member, or a classmate who needs a spark of inspiration today. Let us grow our beautiful daily global family together and support one another step by step, day by day. Until tomorrow's episode, take excellent care of yourself, stay positive, unmask your language confidence with pride, and always remember to maintain your self-respect, keeping a happy smile. I am your host, Kevin, and I will see you very soon. Goodbye, everyone, and bye-bye.